Carter on her book, Helping Someone with Mental Illness. The book is a guide for friends and family members of those diagnosed with mental illness. She also discusses her and her husband's lives today.
Former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, when you were speaking in St. Louis, press reports quoted you saying about Russell Weston, the Capitol gunman, I'm hoping that this case and that of Ted Kaczynski will get Congress moving on the issue of mental illness.
That's right.
What did you mean?
There's such a lack of services for people who really need them in our country, and I just hoped and still hope that we'll have more congressional action so that people who really need help will be able to get help. There's so many people, and the legislation now is so difficult for people with mental illnesses. For instance, Medicaid will cover a mentally ill person going, if they are a danger to themselves or somebody else. When they have a really bad episode, they go to the hospital. As long as they are no danger to themselves or anyone out, they're out. Sometimes just a few days when they really need care. Ideally, they're supposed to then go to the community mental health center, for their medication and for to be monitored, to be sure that they don't do that. They're back out on the streets and back in the hospital after a time. And we just need really good care, not only for those who are very seriously mentally ill like that, but for mental illness across the board.
Two things, remembering from the press coverage of Russell Weston. One is his parents speaking on the news media. I'm sure you saw some of the accounts or read some of the newspaper, and the obvious pain of dealing with someone in your family so ill. And I thought maybe you might comment a little bit about the role of families in dealing with seriously mentally ill people.
The family is integral to the care of people who are seriously mentally ill. In fact, if a person who is seriously mentally ill has a team of people that work with him or her, then they have, which includes the parents and the professionals and so forth, then they have a much better chance of being able to take medication if they have it monitored. See, today, with the new knowledge about the brain, I mean, it's just amazing what we've learned about the brain in the last few years, and we have new medications, new treatment methods. Mental illnesses can be diagnosed, they can be treated, people can lead almost all full, productive lives, but they have to have some help, some that are seriously mentally ill. And if the parent is very helpful and the mentally ill person cooperates, which is important, then that mental illness can be controlled.
The cooperation is the second point.
That's the second point.
That's also something that came out again with Mr. Weston, and just use him because he's recent and people are familiar. That the parents said, what do you do when you have a 40-year-old child, obviously an adult, who won't take his medicine?
That's a very real problem, and there is deniability with many who have serious mental illness. And I wrote my book. And in my book, I wrote about this situation because it's so hard on parents. And how do you work with a seriously mentally ill when they don't want you to work with them? And sometimes they can't. Sometimes a person like that just goes off and the parents lose contact with them. Still, if they had care, if they had somebody that was really interested in them, if we had services so that they were monitored. It's very hard to get some people into care, but the mental illness can be controlled if they will go. It's just that so often they don't want care. We have, for instance, in Atlanta, a home for mentally ill people. We've started trying to get homeless mentally ill people off the streets, and this is what we call low impact, because it's for mentally ill who don't want to come off the streets. They've had probably some bad experience with being in an institution or so forth. And they can come and go. We don't make them check in or out. They don't have to sleep in the bed. They can sleep on the floor. They don't have to bathe and so forth. And over a period of time, you can gain that confidence and get them in the medication, but it takes a long time. It's just a very serious problem. But I do think if we had the services, it would be less and less of that.
Well, let's pause from the issues for a minute because you mentioned your book, and I want to show the audience that that's the reason for our conversation about mental health. You've just written a new book about it that's called Helping Someone with Mental Illness, a Compassionate Guide for Family and Caregivers. It's described as a very practical book that is filled with both anecdotes but also glossary of terms, and really someone can read through it and understand. Who did you write it for?
Well, I've worked on mental health issues since my husband was governor in the early 1970s. And I've tried so hard to help overcome the stigma. And now with all the new information we have about the brain and the new medications and the new treatments and so forth, I don't think people know that mental illnesses can be diagnosed and can be treated, and people can live full, productive lives, almost everyone. So I really wrote the book hoping to educate people who know nothing about mental illnesses, but also I think it's a good handbook for people who have mental illnesses and their families. I have one chapter on when someone you love has a mental illness. Mental illnesses happen in families without any preparation, and often it's such a shock to the family. They don't know where to go or what to do, and so I have that. In fact, people don't know the difference in a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and what social workers do, for instance, what kind of therapy there is. So I tried to describe those, but I also describe what we've learned about the brain and the research hopefully in simple language, because I write like I'm telling my mother what I'm doing, so everything has to be very simple. She's 92 years old, and I try not to use a lot of big words. I didn't name very many parts of the brain. And then I have a chapter on caregiving for the person who is caring for the one with mental illness. And I've had a lot of experience with that because our local college has what we call the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregiving. And so I've had a lot of experience with families caring for people with mental illnesses, and I actually wrote a book about caregiving for people who are caring for anyone, but it included mental illnesses. So I have that chapter too. So I really think it's a handbook for people who know nothing about mental illness to explain some of what a so-called mysteries, people think are mysteries about mental illnesses, to overcome some of the stereotypes and myths, but also a good book for people who have family members who are mentally ill.
You are struck when reading it that mental illness can, just like physical illness, can range from a cold to cancer.
Exactly right.
That mental illness can be really minor short-term cases of depression all the way through to the very serious illnesses we were talking about at the beginning. Does, in fact, that even the minor short-term ones fall under that same rubric of mental illness add to the stigma that people feel in talking about it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I've tried for so long to do is to overcome that distinction. I think if you're sick, you're sick. You ought to be able to get care without being stigmatized about it. And we've learned from research that most of the mental illnesses are biologically based, just like physical illnesses are biologically based. And there should be no distinction. I would like to see courses taught in school, I would like to see mental health, mental illnesses taught just as physical illnesses are taught, and with no distinction. I've worked on that for a long time, actually trying to get medical schools to incorporate mental health issues for primary care physicians who often don't recognize mental illnesses and try treating people over and over and over for headaches, stomach aches, not feeling good, knowing something's wrong when the physician can find nothing wrong, when they're actually suffering from mental illness and can be helped.
Any success with the university so far?
No, but I really think now with the research there's a lot of excitement about mental health in the whole medical field, because it is an exciting time, and learning how mental illness and physical illnesses are connected, how some physical illnesses cause people to be depressed and those kinds of things. But there is a connection of the whole body, and you have to take the whole person. And so I do think there's more interest right now in it because of the exciting discoveries, and at which the new medications, I don't know how many there are even right now, waiting to be, that are being, that people are able to get.
Because you advocate a stronger role for treating these sorts of illnesses, for whom? For the private sector? For the public sector? Really, what are you saying?
For both. There needs to be more done in the private sector. There needs to be more done in the public sector. I have a chapter on the workplace, and actually spoke today to a group of business people about parity for mental health, mental illnesses and insurance coverage. That's something that we in the mental health community have been working for a long time. There's so much discrimination against people with mental illnesses. Insurance policies, for instance, have so much better coverage for physical illnesses than mental illness. And we got a little bit of improvement in 1996 insurance reform, when the Insurance Reform Act passed. But it just removed the annual and the lifetime caps for mental illness. For instance, we have a policy with Emory University, and before this insurance, the lifetime cap for physical illnesses was $1 million, and the lifetime cap for mental illnesses was $50,000, and that was a really good policy. So the caps have been removed. The insurance companies have to provide the same annual and lifetime caps for mental and physical illnesses. The problem is that employers don't have to provide mental health coverage. If they do, the caps have to be the same. But that still leaves so much difference with the length of stay in hospitals that are covered, the co-payments that are so much higher for mental illnesses. So we're working on that. But there are things that people can do, employers can do in the workplace, for instance. They can have people come in and talk to employees about mental health. They can have, when screenings, when they have physical health screenings, and they do sometimes for cholesterol or high blood pressure and so forth. They can observe National Depression Screening Day, National Anxiety Screening, those kinds of things that make it routine to include mental health along with physical health and the concerns about the employees. They can give flexible hours. Now they have to make reasonable accommodations according to ADA, and those are hard to define. It's easy to do things like ramps for wheelchairs and moving somebody by a window if the enclosed place or darker place makes them be more depressed. Those things are easy, but there's some things that are not easy. It's very difficult for employers to know what reasonable accommodations are. There's just a lot of things that can be done in the workplace to accommodate people who have mental illnesses, but also caregivers. I mean, for an employee to make a phone call to be sure that the mentally ill loved one is cared for, flexible hours, the things that employers can do to accommodate mental ill people.
Because C-SPAN is a network about politics, I was struck by one analogy that you used. I'm going to ask you to explain it, which is you talk, in order to show how much progress has been made, about the days of Tom Eagleton to Lawton Chiles.
That's right. That's right.
What were you saying there?
Well, in my book I did that.
Yes.
Well, I think it's just to show that we have come a little bit of difference, because Tom Eagleton had to drop out of the race for vice president. I can't remember. It was a good while ago when McGovern ran. And then Lawton Chiles
72?
was elected.
Is that right, 72?
It was 72. And then Lawton Chiles was elected governor of Florida after he said that he had had some psychiatric therapy. And so that is progress. We just haven't progressed enough.
This is your fourth book. Is that right?
Yes, I wrote one with Jimmy, and I've written 3. Mm-hmm.
You also have a co-author, Susan, is it Gallant?
Gallant. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about her?
She's really wonderful. She has written, I think, something like 18 health books, and she helped me with my caregiving book too a few years back. She is so good. Not only does she know issues, but one of the main and best things she does for me is help me organize the book. She knows what I need to say because she's written so many health books, how to organize the information that I have and the material that I have. But she's also really good at research on the different issues. She helps me with that. I put everything on my computer and do all the writing. I do the writing. She will send me some information. She might send me a lot of information and by email because she lives in California. And I take that and if it's an issue that I have asked her to look at, I study that, and then I write what I want to write about the subject. So she's just really good.
How did you make her acquaintance?
When I wrote the book on caregiving, the editor that she works with so much at Random House put me in touch with her. She's been wonderful.
Times Book published your latest book, which is a Random House division. Have you worked with them in the past?
On the caregiving book.
Do you have a particular editor you've used for your books?
Not particularly.
So you work with a different person from time to time?
Well, I think I've worked with one on these two books as much as I worked with anybody, but Susan and this one particular editor at Random House had worked together so much that Susan and I mainly do the work and then we send it off. It's not like when I haven't worked on these two books like I did with my First Lady from Plains, where I wrote the whole book before I let an editor see it. And I had so much information. I'd never written anything before. I was scared to death to let anybody read it. And then showed it to the editor, who helped me then organize it and so forth. So she was a really big help. But Susan has written so many books that I can work with her, and then we work a little bit with the editor.
Do you enjoy writing?
No.
Why do you do it?
It's very difficult for me. It's very, very hard. Well, I've written these books because I think they're important. I think I learned so much about caregiving. And when I wrote that book, caregiving was a new issue. We started working, to go back just a little bit, our local college had a small endowment for a mental health program. It was my alma mater when we got home from the White House. And so they asked me, the university wanted to start the Rosalind Carter Institute. We put it off for a long time because we were working to get the Carter Center started, the Presidential Library built, and then after that I have a really good mental health program at the Carter Center. So we finally decided to work on caregiving for those with mental illnesses. It quickly spread to caregiving. In a small community, everybody knows what you're doing, and we were having our first symposium was on burnout, and we had this wonderful man coming to talk about it, and everybody wanted to come. So even before the first symposium, it spread to include caregiving for everybody, those who have physical illnesses, mental illness, frail elderly, and so forth. And we did a survey with students going with family caregivers to call on professional caregivers, and then they went with the professional caregivers to call on the family caregivers. We learned so much, and people were isolated, felt like nothing they were doing was worth anything. Family and friends kind of desert them if they are the one who will take care of somebody. It was, I don't know, we heard such poignant stories, and learned so much that I thought that it would be helpful to caregivers. So I wrote that book, and then with this one I've worked on mental health issues since 1971 when Jim was elected governor, and have seen the progress that's been made through the years. And the reason we have all the stereotypes and myths about mental illnesses is because nobody knew what they were, and we didn't know how to treat people with mental illnesses, so we shut them away. And now there's real excitement in the mental health community because we are learning. We can identify mental illnesses and treat them, and I don't think people know that, and I want them to know that. I want the stigma to go away, and so that people won't be hesitant to go for help. So it'll be a normal, natural part of life. And so I wrote the book. One of the main reasons was to overcome the stigma, educate people, but also be helpful to those who have someone with a mental illness in the family.
One of the necessary parts then is going on the book tour. And here you are in Washington. Do you enjoy the book tour part?
I enjoy it when it's not, when I don't have too many cities in one day, because it gets, which I do sometimes.
Do you tire of saying the same thing over again?
Sometimes, yes, just like a campaign. When you're out campaigning, when I was campaigning for my husband for governor or for president, you say the same things over and over and over, because you usually get the same kind of questions over and over and over. But they're the questions that I want people to know the answers to. I don't know all of the answers, that's very obvious, but I want people to know what I know about mental illness, just for instance, so they will overcome the stigma.
I'm sure people also come and tell you stories.
They do.
Do you remember one that you'd like to share? Obviously it won't be in your book because you heard about it on the book tour, but something that really captures what you're trying to tell?
Well, I have a lot of stories in my book. Since I've been on the book tour, I've had so many people. I had one young woman come up to me after a speech in, I think, Oregon, with tears running down her cheeks. She said that she had a mentally ill brother in her family, and that she'd been ashamed of it all her life, and that now I had helped her to know that it was all right for him to be mentally. I mean, those kinds of things just kind of tug at your heartstring.
Mm-hmm. You have no mental illness in your own family, however. No. You've never had any experience from it.
No, but Plains is only 700 people, and one of Jimmy's cousins was in and out of the mental institution years ago, and you know, that's so sad now, because today he could be treated and live a productive life. That is so sad to me. And then there was a young woman who was the age of my son, who was seriously mentally ill, and just a real problem for her parents, and kind of, I won't say disgrace, but it really, you know, that everybody looked down on the family because of this daughter. And those things that sometimes people feel now, feeling like this young woman in Oregon, feel like they ought to be ashamed of it, of mental illness and so forth. So I did see those, but the reason I got involved in the issue was because I campaigned for Jimmy in 1967 when he ran for governor. We lost that year. Got in late when our leading candidate dropped out with a heart attack, our Democratic candidate. But I traveled over the state, which I'd never done before campaigning. And all of our family went different ways because nobody knew who Jimmy Carter was. He had just been in the state Senate in a 7-county area, and Georgia has 159 counties. I had so many people ask me what my husband would do for an emotionally disturbed child, or mentally ill cousin, relative, or institutionalized family member. If he were elected governor, what would he do for them? Well, we had a big expose of our state mental institution in 1959, and at that time, in 1967, Georgia was moving toward regional hospitals, but there was still concern, everything was up in the air about what was going to happen with their family members who were ill. I had so many people ask me, and so I started really looking at the problem and found out that no one at that time was speaking up for them. Nobody would talk about mental illness publicly. Nobody would admit that a family member had a mental illness. There was just nobody, I felt at that time, to speak up for the needs of mentally ill people, and that's why I worked at a governor's commission, then a president's commission, and now have a really good program at the Carter Center.
Tipper Gore also has associated herself with this. You mention her in your book. Do you work together?
Yes. I have as I said, a really good program at the Carter Center with annual symposiums where I have about the representatives, the top people of about 60 mental health organizations that come. Every year we discuss the issues. I work with Tipper on those. She came, I don't know whether she came last year, I think. But anyway, she comes to some of them, but then we work with her staff people. And if we're working on parity for insurance coverage and those kinds of things, we work closely with her staff. So yes, she's a very good friend, and I am so thankful she's there working on this issue.
Also, in the beginning of your book, in the acknowledgments, you mentioned President Carter and his assistants. What role did he play as you created this book?
He is very helpful. He edits everything I write. I edit everything he writes.
Who's the tougher editor?
I've gotten to be a fairly good editor because he's written so many books. In fact, he has a new one now on the virtues of aging. But we wrote a book together, which was a disaster because we write so differently. But we finally made it work by when we disagreed on something, and we'd put, I think we had my initials, RC, and then we'd have what I thought, and JC with what he thought. That's the way we kind of solved that. But so we don't write together anymore. But he will edit mine, I will edit his. The good thing about that is I don't have to take his suggestions. He doesn't have to take mine. But at least they're there for us to see, and very helpful, very helpful. And he was particularly helpful with this book because mental health terminology that I am so used to is not foreign to him because he's heard a lot of it, but he could read this and say, your mother wouldn't understand this. And that part was really helpful in writing research about the brain, which is very difficult. I had to study so much to kind of learn what was going on for myself, and then try to put it in simple language. And I would write something out, and he said, "I don't understand." He would say, "I don't understand this." Well, everything that's written about research on the brain is so technical that it took a lot of study. So, in that way, with this book, he was more helpful with me, I think, helpful to me, because something that would be obvious to me because I've worked in the issue so long, he wouldn't understand.
What do you think of the concept of his latest book, The Virtues of Aging? Are there, in fact, virtues?
There are virtues. People laugh all the time when we talk about it because they say it must be a very brief book. But he defines virtues in two ways. The virtues that come with aging, the good things in life now that we enjoy with children and grandchildren, and more time to do things that we want to do because, well, although we're not retired, we still take time to do things that we want to do. I think the key to it is to having a good older life is to stay busy and have things that occupy your mind and so forth. But also he talks about the virtues that older people have that they can share with younger people. And so I think it's an interesting book.
Both you and President Carter, I hope you don't mind me saying this, are in your 70s now.
That's right.
Do you think of yourself as a senior citizen?
No. I remember the first time, and this was a good while ago, that Jimmy came home. He had been to Atlanta. The Carter Center's in Atlanta. We're in Plains, which is about a 2.5-hour drive, 3-hour drive from Atlanta to Plains. He'd been to Atlanta and was stopped along the way to eat breakfast, and the Secret Service agents were there. And when he got his bill, it was not as much as the agents. And so he was talking about it, and he said, I don't know why mine is, I got the same thing you did, and it's not the same price. And this man sitting next door heard him, next to the table next to him. He said, it's right, Mr. President, because they give discounts to senior citizens. Well, I think it was the first time he'd ever thought of himself as being a senior citizen. This was a good while ago. He came home. It was really a shock to him. So,
enough that he retold the story.
I know. It took him a while to get over it, I think. But no, I don't know. We're as busy now as I think we've ever been. We have so many interesting things that we're doing at the Carter Center with our programs, and I don't know. Maybe you're as old as you feel, and I don't feel very old.
Your partnership is now 50-plus years, the two of you. Your marriage, isn't that right? 52?
Been married 52 years.
What's the secret to longevity there?
I think that the respect we have for each other, I think, makes an awful lot of difference. Jimmy thinks that I can do most anything I want to do, and I think he can do most anything he wants to do. There's a mutual respect. When we got married, Jimmy was in the Navy for 7 years after we got married, and he was gone, and I had to take care of babies and do things. And then when we came home, I began to help him in our farm supply business, and I kept the books, which I had never done. He helped me learn. I took a correspondence course from the local vocational technical school. Well, I had a friend there who taught, and she gave me the books, and I studied. But pretty soon I knew more about the business on paper than he did, and I could advise him on some of the things we needed to do. And so we just developed this mutual respect for what each other could do. And I think because of that, and because I've worked with him as a partner on almost everything, it's not like he went out and was president and I stayed home, those kinds of things. So I think it's just a mutual respect.
In addition to writing, what other new activities have you taken up in your post-White House years?
Post-White House years? Well, I began skiing when I was 59, downhill skiing, which we've loved. Well, there are all kinds of things we've done that we had not done before because of the opportunities we had. For instance, the Carter Center has developed more than we ever dreamed it would. We have programs in 35 African countries, health and agriculture programs, conflict resolution, human rights, and we travel to Africa once or twice a year to visit the programs. We have a Latin America program. We monitor elections. We've monitored 16 elections, I think, in this hemisphere, bringing democracy to countries, or assuring that democracy remains in a country. So all of these things are new and different. We've been working in the inner city of Atlanta with a program we call the Atlanta Project. Right now we are working to get kindergartens in all the areas, in all the schools. We're working to get, with the criminal justice system in Atlanta, to get after-school programs for children in middle schools. So there are all kinds of interesting, exciting things we're doing. We're even working with village elections in China, and those things are all new and different and exciting, besides my mental health work.
This is a completely speculative question. It may not be possible to answer, but knowing your own childhood and the like, could you imagine that if you had not met Jimmy Carter, you still would have spent a life involved in issues and news and politics?
Probably not. I don't know.
Was your family one, as you were growing up, that was involved in the community, knew what was going on?
No. My father died when I was 13. I was the oldest of 4 children. My mother had to go to work. She worked in a grocery store and then in a school lunchroom. And while I was still in high school, she went to work in the post office to raise 4 children, sent us all to college. We didn't know we were poor, but my mother just worked. Jimmy's sister Ruth was my best friend. His father was active in everything, in all of the town, city council, well, all the town events anyway, and he died in 1953, I think, and he was in the state legislature when he died, and they were always friends of the governor, and so I had that kind of experience with Ruth, because I was at her house as much as I was at mine most of the time. But not until I wrote my book, The First Lady from Plains, my memoirs when I came home, and talked to my daddy's sister, who at that time was 96 years old, did I know that he was on the city council when he died. So he was involved, and probably would have, if he had lived, would have I would have been more involved and know more about what was going on in the political area. But no, I don't know that I would have been involved in issues. Before Jimmy, was elected to the state Senate, I worked. I kept the books, as I said, in our farm supply business, and was very active in PTA, those kinds of school issues. But I don't know.
What did you learn about what it's possible to accomplish as a First Lady, both First Lady of the state of Georgia and First Lady of the nation?
Well, there's so much influence in that office, and it doesn't matter what a First Lady, what issues she chooses to work on, or which issues she chooses to work on, they get attention. And I always thought it'd be a terrible waste not to have to work on issues, to call attention to them. Of course, people in state legislatures and Congress don't always react the way you want them to, but they listen to you, and the issue becomes an important issue. A First Lady can help with any issue by just going to a fundraiser. The place will be packed because the First Lady's there. So there's a lot of influence and a lot of responsibility in that position.
And you find that it continues even after you leave the White House?
Well, what you learn when you leave the White House is the resources are still there because Jimmy was president. We can call on almost anybody in any field, the best people in any field, for help, and they'll help. And it's a huge responsibility, but with great opportunities. And so try to take advantage of those opportunities.
We've made a few references to White House days. Would you mind taking a minute and catching our audience up on your children? We see so much when you're in the White House, and yet years go by and you really don't hear much of what's going on. How are they these days? What are they doing?
They're fine. They're all fine. For a couple of years now, until June, all of them had been in the Atlanta area. Actually, for about a year and a half, it was the first time we had all four of them close to home. But now we have, one of our sons was working for an investment company. They sent him to Bermuda to open an office. He came home after being out there for about a year and a half. Came back, he was transferred back to Atlanta. He was transferred to Atlanta. He had not been in Atlanta. But then he, just in June, went to work for a bank back in Bermuda. Chip and Jeff are both working. Jeff's a computer software person. He's a designer of computer software. Lives in Peachtree City, which is just south of Atlanta. Chip lives in Decatur and works with the Friendship Force mostly now. He does also work with the Carter Center. For instance, when we were when we were trying to get a peace agreement in the Sudan, because at the Carter Center we have a program to eradicate guinea worm, which is a horrible disease. And we were making really good progress and have made really good progress, almost eradicated it, will eradicate it in the next few years. But there was a war going on in the southern part of the Sudan, and we couldn't get in. And Jim was able to talk the head of state and the revolutionary into a ceasefire for 2 months. And the reason they did that was because we told them we'd send one of our sons over, because a lot of these people don't trust the United Nations, they don't trust the United States, but they will deal directly through a son. So Chip went to the Sudan state for a month or 6 weeks or something like that. So we do use, he does do things for the Carter Center, work with the Carter Center too. Amy got a master's in art history from Tulane a year or so ago, and moved back to Atlanta. She's married. She's been married for 2 years. She's now renovating an old house. She illustrated a children's book, a story that Jimmy wrote a couple of Christmases ago. And I don't know whether she's going to do more of that or not. I hope she will, because she's really good. And we have 9 grandchildren. Our oldest grandson's in the Peace Corps in South Africa, and great young man. The next oldest one, who's in college, works in the state capitol. He's now managing the political campaign of our Democratic, help running the political campaign for our Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. I think he'll be the real, well, I'm not sure he'll be the only politician in the family, but I know he can't wait until he can run, till he finishes school. He almost ran for state legislature last year, but decided to wait until he finishes college, because he's going to school at Georgia State University at the same time he's doing that.
You were anticipated my next question, which is why no politicians in the next generations of the Carter family, do you think? Is it a surprise that none of your children chose that life?
Well, I think Chip would have, except when we came home from the White House, he had planned to run for office. But then he moved to Atlanta and got a job and knew nobody in that area. It was just, you know, after he left home, I think it was always in the back of his mind, but he got busy and just didn't do it. He's the one that is the real politician in the family. But I think there will be among our grandchildren.
You have talked a bit about the Carter Center and its interest in issues involving world peace. Just last week, the story about the Nobel Prize and President Carter. What was your reaction upon hearing that? I had always thought that he should have gotten it when Begin and Sadat, because the peace would never, that peace treaty would never have happened if it hadn't been for him. But I don't know, you're busy when you're doing those things, and who thinks of a Nobel Peace Prize when you're doing that? You're just trying to make it happen. Of course, over the years, I think he deserves it for other things that we've done since we left the White House. But I never have. You don't worry about it. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. So you just do what you think is good and best for the country or the world or whatever you're working on. How important to the Carter Center is it that you and President Carter stay involved?
I think it's important, but we are making plans for the transition to the time when we will not be there any longer. And all of the staff, everybody at the Carter Center knows that we won't be there a long time now. And so we've spent a lot of time working and thinking about this. And we're raising an endowment for the Carter Center so that the programs will go on after we're gone. And the Carter Center has, Jimmy calls it a marriage with Emory University. It took us 5 years to work out a contract so that the Carter Center would remain unique. It would never be just another academic arm of Emory, but that our action programs, we've, ever since the Carter Center was developed, and ever since it began, we've had a relationship with Emory. And we did the academic studies with Emory, but we don't study anything that we can't take action on. And we wanted to stay that way. Everything that we do, a study has an action component. We have health programs working to eradicate diseases and immunizing children in the world. We have a child survival task force. Is not exactly a part of the Carter Center, but we work with these people throughout the world. And since we began, that immunization across the world has increased dramatically. Not because of us, but because of Dr. Bill Foege is our health fellow at the Carter Center. He runs that, and I think one reason the Carter Center has developed so is because we have the top people in the field, like Dr. Foege for health fellow, Don Hopkins, who runs our, we call Global 2000, guinea worm eradication. Those programs was with Centers for Disease Control, working on, actually on guinea worm for something like 7 years or so before he went with the Carter Center and was able to go out in the field. We'll eradicate that disease, and it will be only the second disease ever eradicated. Smallpox was the first.
What is the disease?
Dr. Foege was one that kind of led the smallpox eradication. It's an illness that comes from a little microorganism in the water and people catch water in these countries in these ponds during the rainy season, and then they live off of that water all during the dry season. And it gets muddy and foamy. They walk out in it and dip up water and drink it, take it fact, to do everything with the only water they have. And but this little microorganism, and the human body is the human is the only host. So if we can keep people from drinking that water with this little microorganism, it grows into a long worm and comes out a year later and totally immobilizes people. Comes out in moist places in the body. You can imagine where that is. But a lot of in the feet, because they walk out in the water, it feels so bad, hurts so bad when it's coming out. It stings from underneath. They don't know they have it until it starts to emerge. They'll walk out in the water to soothe it, and the end that comes out, the water helps it come out, lays hundreds of thousands of eggs and starts all over again. So if you can keep them out of the water, teach them to strain every drop of water they drink, and for 1 year, it's gone. But it's so hard. It's so many isolated areas in all of those countries. It's already been, we've eradicated from Pakistan, Yemen, a good many countries, and I think we're down there to 6 or 7 countries, and some might have 4 cases, or some might have 12 or something. We're down to about 30,000 cases outside the Sudan. And actually during that ceasefire, that Jimmy was able to get, which lasted for 6 months, 2 months, and then 2 more, and then 2 more, we were able to, we had already been to the financial community, the funders, to get the money. We had, and we don't do these things by ourselves. We have all the non-governmental organizations, we had so many working with us. They were all poised and ready to go in. We identified the areas where there was guinea worm in the Sudan. What we do is teach the local people what to do to keep people out of the water, and then they monitor and so forth. So we don't really know what's happening in the Sudan now because you can't get into many of those areas. We hope that still working, and they're still working. We think they are. Some place that we can monitor, they are still working. So, so we read that's some of the kinds of things we do.
With all these issues, and with your book, tours and writing, how much time do you get to spend in planes?
Not enough.
Do you miss
Not
it?
enough. We travel an awful lot with our projects, but we do have time at home, and we do. All of our trips are not work. We fly fish. We go fishing several trips a year. We go skiing. We take our family skiing a couple of times a year. We have one program at Crested Butte, Colorado, which is a really wonderful family place, fairly small, but we take people who pay their way, and we take children from the poverty area of Atlanta, and some children, and we go. It's actually a fundraiser for the Carter Center, and it began as a fundraiser for the Atlanta project, but it's developed into a fundraiser. The resort gives us a little discount. We get some discounts, but the main way we raise money is we have a big auction, and Jimmy makes something in his carpenter shop for the auction every year, but other people donate things too. Many people donate things. Delta donates trips. Some automobile companies donate automobiles. I think Ford gave a lease for a year of an automobile. The big things people bid on, and we raise money for the Carter Center. And you can come, anybody can come, help us raise money for the Carter Center. And so all of our trips, they're not all work. We have a good time. We have time at home in planes.
I was struck in one of the interviews I read that you gave that you don't get the daily paper in planes.
We get the local paper, but the Atlanta papers are about 2 days late. New York Times is a couple of days late. We get USA Today almost every day.
So you surf the net.
So we surf the net, yeah, every day. But the papers are so late by the time you get them that we just don't subscribe to them anymore. We did it first, but then by the time they come, you know what's in them. And so we surf the net.
You've worked on your book by computer and modem. You read the newspapers by computer and modem. What's the lesson there for people about the power of the internet these days?
I think you can do almost. We even communicate with our grandson in the boondocks of South Africa by email. I think, well, it's just unlimited what you can do on the internet.
Was it daunting for you to learn how the internet worked?
I don't think so, because I'd used the computer. I had written, well, I had when there were word processors, back when they were only word processors, and I do our books. I do our financial work on the computer, and so the internet. I wish I knew more about it, but our son Jeff, as I said, our children are all so knowledgeable about it that if we have any problems, we just call them. And also our grandson, who, when I think he was 11 or 12 years old, I was teaching adults in the neighborhood they lived in how to use the computer. So we have plenty of help at home with
Well, bringing us back to mental health issues, which is the subject of your current book, are there resources for people available on the internet to find out more if they get interested in this book?
Absolutely. And I have a list in my book of the email addresses of the major mental health organizations, the National Institute of Mental Health. You know, all of that is listed in the book.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another book in you?
Not now. I need a rest from writing it. It's really hard to write a book, particularly one that I had to study so much to write, and keep up with all the other things that we do too, the travels and the programs and so forth. And so I'm kind of burned out right now.
How long did it take you from the idea stage to publication?
Probably 2 years.
And much of that.
Most of it was for instance, I saved, not this past year, but the year before, I saved 2 months when I had very little so that I could stay at home and work on it. But you just have to fit it in. It's really, it's hard. Jimmy can go in his office and sit down and write a chapter. I go in my office and I get everything way out here. It takes me forever to get it back the way I want it. He says I'm like Moses going up on Mount Sinai and coming down with it perfect. And I don't want a word changed, and he's almost right. Because I work and work and work and work to get it the way I want to do it. But it takes a long time. But I don't know. It's hard for me to write. It's hard.
You write on the computer?
Mm-hmm.
First draft's
totally.
not long.
I can't even think. If Jimmy says you need to expand this so we can understand it better, I have to put it on the computer. I've gotten to where I'm so used to doing that I don't even think if I don't put it on the computer, which is not a good thing to say, but it's true.
And when do you write best?
I don't work well. I'm not a morning person. I had a really hard time writing my first book because I'd never written. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't start until I would get up, and then I would have breakfast, and then I would go in my office to start working. It was about probably 9 o'clock. Jim had been up at 5 writing. When I would sit down, he would come in and say, "Why don't we take a little break?" I hadn't even gotten started. So we had to make some rules about that. Finally, shut the door and said 9 to 12, do not disturb. I had to do that after 2 or 3 months. I thought anybody, my mother who would come not knowing that, you know, that I needed this writing time, so, and who wanted to help me, and that worked. And so now, most of the time, I do get up very early, 5 or 6 o'clock, but it takes me an hour or so to wake up before I can even think. I drink a cup of coffee, I look at the screen. I do it because lots of times I don't have time to finish what I want to do because I have other things. But I write better. I could write all night. I could write all night. So totally different from Jimmy. He's at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. He just says he can't think anymore. So, and I think I learned that when the children were little. And I was keeping the books, and I would get them all in bed, and then I would work on my books from my business. And then when Jimmy was in the state senate, I did his correspondence at night. Children were little, I'd put them to bed and do the correspondence. He would be out campaigning, or he would be off in Atlanta when the Senate was in session, because I did most of that correspondence for him. And I think maybe that's why I work better at night. Maybe it's a habit of something that I learned over a long period of time.
Night became quiet time, your private think time.
Mm-hmm.
As a writer, are there authors that you are drawn to?
I don't know. I never have particularly tried to, I don't think I've ever particularly tried to write like this writer or that another writer. I know when I was writing my memoirs the first time, and I didn't want anybody to read, I wouldn't let Jimmy see it either. And our daughter-in-law came, who was a writer, and I had written, I don't know, probably 600 or 700 pages. And from the beginning of that book until the end, my writing changed totally because I learned about writing. But she, and I think I probably had written some of it over by then, but she took it off, and I was so nervous. She came back and said, "It's pretty good." Well, but she was the one who told me, well, when you campaign, people say everything in very simple terms because people don't know issues, don't understand them. You have to say them, explain them very carefully. And she was the one that said, write for maybe that woman who's under the hairdryer. And I think she kind of gave me the idea that to write simply. And I think that's why I started just kind of trying to, I found that if I was, when I came home from the White House, that if I was telling Mother what I did, because she didn't understand the issues or anything, I had to tell it very simply. And so I think the combination of Judy's advice and my mother, talking to my mother, kind of determined the way I ended up writing.
Your mother has been a theme throughout our conversation today. Can you tell me a little bit more about her? You said she's 92?
She's 92. She's really wonderful. She was 34 when my father died. And the next year, her mother died. She's the only child, and my grandfather came to live with us. He was 70. He lived to be 95. And she had to retire from the post office when she was 70. My grandfather died in 1967. I remember that because I was campaigning for Jimmy for governor that year, the year that we lost. But, and then in 1975, the postmaster, she worked in the post office, the postmaster wanted her to come to work at 7 in the morning so he didn't have to come so early, and he wanted her to be there later in the afternoon. So she was never free to come and go, to have, one good thing about it was she could go home at noon and take care of Papa, my granddaddy, fix his lunch and all, but I call that now flexible hours. But it also kept her totally tied down. She had never did anything for herself until she retired from the post office at age 70. The age has been raised now, but it was 70 then. And it was devastating to her. I know I was campaigning, it was 1975, and I was campaigning, and I came home, and her birthday's at Christmas Eve, and my brother said that Mother cried all week, so I went to see her. This was January. And I said, Mother, look, you had to be at the post office every day at 7 o'clock for so long. I would think it would be really wonderful not to have to go. And she said, it's not just that, it's just that people don't think I can do good work anymore. It was really sad. But then she got involved in the campaign, made so many friends who brought her to Washington while we were there. She went on trips. And actually, she was over 70 years old when she finally had some time for herself. And lived by herself until last year.
What role did she play in this book for you?
Well, as I said, she is the one that I felt like I was talking to when I was writing it.
So did she, in fact, read it for you and tell you whether she understood it?
No, no.
Just was always in your mind? She
was always in my mind, and she did read some portions of it. But she was sick, and I think she's read it now, but she didn't read it when I was writing it.
Well, I'm sorry to say our time is up, but I want to show the book one more time as we conclude here. Rosalynn Carter's newest book, her fourth, is called Helping Someone with Mental Illness, A Compassionate Guide for Family, Friends, and Caregivers. Thank you for spending an hour with us to talk about the issue of mental illness and also to tell us a little bit about your life now.
Great, thank you.
Mrs. Carter has worked on behalf of persons with mental illness for over 25 years. You can learn more about the former First Lady and her book, Helping Someone with Mental Illness, by clicking on our website at www.booktv.org. Next weekend.